A tense silence hung in the air. The young woman's father stared at his son-in-law with a cold look and said in an even voice, "I'll repeat the question, young man. Why has your mommy moved into my daughter's apartment? Doesn't she have a place of her own?" Sensing trouble, the daughter hurriedly shut herself away in the bedroom. Hello, dear listeners. I'm glad to welcome you to my channel. Today I present to you a new, interesting story. Enjoy listening. Dust motes danced in a slanted beam of sunlight, lazily settling on the glossy surface of the new dresser. Inga ran her finger across it, noting with satisfaction that there was hardly any dust. Saturday morning was her favorite time. Carl was still asleep, his arms sprawled loosely, and she could enjoy the quiet and the light of their own, hard-won, perfect apartment. 2 years of a crushing mortgage, 3 months of renovations they'd done almost entirely by themselves, and here it was, their nest, their fortress. The light gray paint on the walls, which she'd chosen from 20 different shades, was called Scandinavian Fog. A funny name, but it fit perfectly. Depending on the light, the walls looked bluish, then lilac, then almost white. On the floor was pale laminate that she and Carl had laid for a whole week, constantly bickering over uneven joints and checking YouTube videos every few minutes. By the bookcase they'd assembled last, one board betrayed them with an annoying squeak. That squeak became their private secret, almost a good luck charm. "Careful, landmine." Carl would whisper whenever one of them stepped on that spot, and they'd quietly giggle. Inga walked over to the window. The 3-bedroom apartment on the top, 12th floor of an old panel building had one undeniable advantage: the view. The whole neighborhood lay spread out below. Sleepy courtyards, treetops, the thin spires of new buildings on the horizon. She had bought this apartment before getting married, taking on an overwhelming mortgage that they were now carrying together. Her parents had helped with the down payment. Her father, Grigory, had sold her grandfather's old garage and silently handed her all the money. "For your own place, sweetheart, so you won't depend on anyone," he'd said back then. Carl came into her life later, and this apartment became their shared home. He threw himself into the renovation with enthusiasm, and Inga was endlessly grateful to him. He never once reminded her that the apartment was technically hers, he always said ours. Our walls, our kitchen, our bedroom. And Inga had almost believed it. She carefully watered her succulents on the windowsill, a whole collection of funny, spiky little creatures in designer concrete pots. Each one had been bought for some occasion. This one after a successful project at work, that one on the day they made an early payment on the loan. It was her small world, orderly and understandable. Here, everything had its own story and its own place. A place she had chosen. A light breeze stirred the snow-white sheer curtains. In the kitchen, the coffee machine beeped, finishing its cleaning cycle. Life was predictable, cozy, and right like a mortgage payment schedule. "Why are you up so early, night owl?" Carl's sleepy voice sounded behind her. He came up and hugged her from behind, burying his nose in her hair. He smelled like sleep in their shared sandalwood-scented shampoo. "Hypnotizing your cactuses again?" "They're not cactuses, they're succulents," Inga corrected him gently, leaning her head back on his shoulder. "I'm just admiring them. Look at the light today." "Light is light," he mumbled, kissing her neck. "Come on, let's have some coffee. I'm making pancakes today, your recipe, with ricotta and lemon zest." "Really?" Inga turned to look into his eyes. His brown eyes were still sleepy, a crease from the pillow marked his cheek, so familiar, so homey. "What's the catch?" "No catch," he smiled. "I just love you, and I love it when you smile. And I got paid yesterday. We could go to that Italian place tonight, remember? It was their spot. A small basement restaurant with incredible pasta and tart house wine. They went there for special occasions." "Wow," Inga drawled. "What's the occasion?" "Every day is a celebration," Carl declared solemnly and kissed her properly on the lips. "Now march to the shower while I create culinary masterpieces." She laughed and headed for the bathroom, feeling absolutely, undeniably happy. The water washed away the last traces of sleep, and from the kitchen came the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft hiss of oil in a pan. In moments like these, Inga thought this was it, the thing they wrote about in silly romance novels. Simple human happiness, when everything is in its place, when you're loved, when your shared world smells like sandalwood and pancakes. Over breakfast, they made plans. Not big ones, just small Saturday plans. A trip to the home improvement store for a new bathroom shelf, a stop at the bookstore, dinner at that same restaurant. They ate pancakes, getting smeared with sour cream, and laughed. Carl told funny stories from work, parodying his boss, and Inga kept refilling his coffee. Everything felt easy and carefree. And right at that moment, when she reached for her phone to photograph an especially golden pancake, Carl's phone on the table vibrated and burst into an annoying ringtone from an old action movie. The screen lit up with the word Mom. Carl immediately grew serious, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and pressed the green button. Yeah, Mom, hi. Yes, everything's fine. We're having breakfast. He shot a quick glance at Inga and smiled faintly. What? Right now? Are you sure? Inga tensed up. Conversations with Linda were always like this. She only heard fragments of Carl's replies, but from the way his face changed, she could piece the whole thing together. First surprise, then excitement, then some kind of childlike, ecstatic joy. Mom, are you serious? You actually sold it and already have the money? Wow. You're a hero. Carl jumped up from his chair and started pacing the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear. Inga froze with her fork in midair. Sold it? Sold what? Yes, of course. Of course we. Yeah, I'll talk to Inga now, but I'm sure what questions could there be? Mom, you're the best. He hung up and turned to Inga. His eyes were shining like he'd just won the lottery. Inga, you're going to freak out. Mom, she sold her one bedroom in Riverside, he blurted out. Can you imagine? Lived there her whole life and sold it. Why? Inga didn't understand. Linda adored her little apartment, her neighborhood, her retired girlfriend she sat with on the bench outside the building. For us. Carl's voice cracked with excitement. She said we're cramped here, paying this endless mortgage, and this way she'll give us all the money. We'll add to it and buy something bigger, a 3-bedroom in a new building or even a house. Can you imagine, Inga, our own house? Inga's head started spinning. A house, money, sold her apartment. It all hit her so suddenly she didn't know how to react. It sounded too good to be true. And too strange. Wait, Carl, she tried to keep her voice calm. How did she sell it? When? She didn't even talk to us. Why would she? It's a surprise, a gift. He came up to her again and took her hands in his. His palms were hot and damp with excitement. She didn't want to burden us, you know? She did everything herself. Found a realtor, buyers. She says the deal is done, the money's already in her account. And where is she going to live? The question slipped out on its own. The main one. The most important one. Carl hesitated for a second, the shine on his face dimming slightly. Well, that's what I wanted to talk about. She needs somewhere to stay while the paperwork goes through, while we look for a new place. You understand? The cold knot in Inga's stomach turned into a block of ice. She understood everything. She wants to stay with us, she asked directly. Well, yeah, Carl said brightly, clearly thinking the hardest part was over. Just for a couple of weeks, until all the banking stuff with transferring such a big amount is settled. She doesn't want to keep it in cash, she's scared. She'll put it in an account and then transfer it to us. Inga, come on, it's logical. You don't mind. A couple of weeks, Inga, for the sake of our future house. Inga looked at his happy, pleading face and understood that she was trapped. Any refusal, any hesitation right now would look like monstrous ingratitude. A woman had sold her only home for their sake, and the daughter-in-law, a venomous snake, didn't want to shelter her for a miserable 2 weeks. She could already see this picture through Carl's eyes, through his mother's eyes, through the eyes of the whole world. Of course I don't mind, she forced out, feeling her lips go numb. If it's just for a couple of weeks. I knew it, I knew you were the best, he shouted, grabbing her and spinning her around the kitchen, knocking over a chair. The crash echoed in Inga's head as a dull ache. I'll call her right now and make her happy. She's already packed her things, can you believe it? She said if we agree, she'll be here by tonight. He ran into the hallway with his phone, and Inga stayed sitting at the table. The coffee had gone cold. The perfect pancake on her plate looked like a mockery. The sunbeam disappeared behind a passing cloud. The perfect Saturday morning was over before it had even really begun. Her fortress, her nest, her world with carefully arranged succulents on the windowsill was about to be invaded. And she herself had given permission for it. Linda arrived at 6 in the evening, just as she'd promised. Carl met her downstairs by the entrance to help with her things. Inga stood by the window and watched as they unloaded from the taxi 2 enormous checkered duffel bags, the kind shuttle traders usually use, a cardboard box tied with twine, and several heavy shopping bags from Target. A couple of weeks, Inga thought with bitter irony. With luggage like that, you could survive a nuclear winter. When the door opened, a completely alien smell rushed into the apartment along with the guest. A thick, suffocating mix of valerian drops, camphor oil, and Chanel No. 5. This scent was Linda's calling card, her personal flag with which she claimed territory. "Inga, sweetheart, hello," she sang out, stretching out a limp cheek that smelled of hand cream for a kiss. Inga awkwardly pecked the air next to it. "Oh, it was such a struggle getting here, the traffic was awful." "Well, taking a poor burned-out soul." She was a short, heavy-set woman with a voluminous hairstyle, a chemical perm made from bleached, overprocessed hair. She was wearing a raspberry-colored tracksuit made of shiny synthetic fabric that clung tightly to her impressive curves. Her small, deep-set eyes quickly and tenaciously scanned the entryway, lingered on the new dresser, slid over the walls. There was no admiration in that look, no happiness for the kids. It was the look of an appraiser, the look of an inspector. "Carl, my son, where am I supposed to put all my riches?" she fussed, nudging a duffel bag with her foot. "Mom, let's put it in the living room for now." Carl, flushed with effort and happiness, dragged the heavy bags inside. "Make yourself comfortable. Feel at home." She already has, Inga thought grimly as she closed the front door. The smell of Chanel No. 5 already seemed to have soaked into the wallpaper. The first evening passed in tense, nervous chaos. Linda refused to go out to dinner. What restaurants, kids? Every penny counts now. And Inga had to urgently figure out what to cook at home. Her mother-in-law immediately followed her into the kitchen and stood behind her back, commenting on every move. "Oh, you don't sauté the onion for soup?" "I always sauté it, it makes it richer." "And olive oil must be expensive." "In my day we fried everything in vegetable oil and nothing, we were healthier." "And what's this? Rosemary? Lord have mercy, are you eating grass?" Inga silently gripped the knife handle, feeling sweat bead on her forehead. Seeing her state, Carl tried to lead his mother out of the kitchen. "Mom, come on. Go rest from the trip. Inga can handle it herself. She's our chef." "I'm just trying to help," Linda said, genuinely offended. "She's young, inexperienced. I just want what's best. Running a household isn't the same as pushing buttons in an office." In the end, dinner was eaten in almost complete silence. The soup tasted bland to Inga, even though she'd cooked it 100 times before. Her mother-in-law's presence poisoned the food, the air, the space. After dinner, Linda settled herself on their big corner couch in the living room, the one she and Carl had chosen for 6 months, and turned the TV on full volume. Shouts and sobs from the latest talk show poured out of the speakers. Carl made up the couch for her, brought her a pillow and a blanket. "Good night, Mom. If you need anything, we're in the bedroom." "Good night, my son." She patted his hand. "And you, Inga, close the kitchen window, it's drafty for me. I'll catch a cold. I'm old, I'll end up sick on you." Inga silently went and closed the window that had been letting fresh night air into the apartment. Now their shared space was completely ruled by the thick scent of valerian. The first days turned into torture. Inga came home from work and felt everything inside her tighten the moment she crossed the threshold. The apartment stopped being her refuge. It became a battlefield where Inga waged a guerrilla war for her territory. Linda, having settled in, started running the household. She rewashed all the improperly washed dishes, did a big load of laundry mixing whites with colors because nothing's going to happen from your chemicals, criticized all of Inga's cleaning products, declaring that nothing better than baking soda and laundry soap has ever been invented. Carl reacted to all of this with Olympic calm. Inga, don't be so tense. Mom just wants what's best. She's helping, keeping an eye on the house while we're at work. Be grateful. Grateful. That word started to give Inga a nervous tick. She was supposed to be grateful that her personal things were being rearranged, that her cooking skills were being questioned, that her home smelled like a pharmacy for the elderly. The climax of the first week was the tea. Inga had a small weakness expensive, elite Chinese tea. She bought it in a specialty shop in 50-gram portions and drank it only on special occasions. After a hard day, when she needed to relax and put her thoughts in order, or on a weekend with a book. It was her ritual, her little meditation. White tea, silver needles, oolong, de hong pao. She kept it in airtight metal tins in the farthest corner of a kitchen cabinet. On Friday, after an especially exhausting week full of client revisions and barbed comments from her mother-in-law, Inga came home dreaming of just one thing: a cup of aromatic, astringent oolong. She dragged herself to the kitchen, barely reacting to yet another episode of a reality show blasting from the living room. She opened the treasured cabinet and took out the tin labeled de hong pao. It felt suspiciously light. Inga opened the lid and looked inside. The tin was almost empty. A few shriveled dark leaves lay forlornly at the bottom. Cold seized her hands. This couldn't be happening. Just last Sunday the tin had been almost full. She turned around. In the living room, curled up on the couch with her legs tucked under her in wool socks, sat Linda. Next to her, on the coffee table, stood a huge porcelain polka-dot mug, steam rising from it. A thin, unmistakable aroma of her favorite tea hung in the air, mixing with the smell of valerian drops. Inga silently closed the tin and left the kitchen. She went into the bedroom, where Carl was changing after work. Carl. Her voice was quiet and dull. Your mom drank all my tea. He turned around, not immediately understanding what she meant. What tea? Mine. The one in the metal tin. The expensive one. Carl frowned, and then his face took on that exact expression Inga had started to hate, a mix of condescension and mild irritation. Inga, come on. Tea is tea. Mom saw it, thought it was just regular tea, made herself a cup. So what? Are you seriously going to begrudge Mom a little tea? She didn't do it to be mean. We'll buy you more of your tea. They don't sell it at the supermarket, Carl. She could feel helpless rage boiling inside her. This isn't about money. It's about the fact that it was my thing. She took it without asking. Oh, what a tragedy, he waved it off. My thing. Are we a family or not? Now everything is shared. Mom is part of our family. Get used to it. She's old school, she doesn't understand your personal boundaries. She just wanted a cup of tea. You should be happy she liked it. He stepped closer and tried to hug her, but Inga pulled away. Don't touch me. She looked at him and didn't recognize him. Where was the guy who a week ago was making her pancakes and whispering that every day was a celebration? In front of her stood a different man, irritated, foreign, who had just effortlessly dismissed her feelings, her small joys, her right to have personal things in her own home. Now everything is shared. The words landed like a sentence. Another week passed. The couple of weeks Carl had promised were coming to an end. The atmosphere in the apartment became unbearable. Inga tried to come home as late as possible, staying late at work or stopping by the mall just to wander between stores. Home stopped being home. It was Linda's territory, where Inga felt like some poor relative they tolerated out of charity. Her mother-in-law didn't hesitate to criticize her over anything. Inga, there's dust on the baseboards. You've put on weight, sweetheart. You need to eat less flour. That dress is so gloomy, like a widow's. Carl acted like he didn't notice any of it. Or didn't want to notice. He came home from work, ate dinner, kissed his mother on the cheek, and buried himself in his laptop. Any attempt by Inga to talk made him silently irritated. He became a stranger. The wall between them grew every day, and that wall's name was Linda. The question of the money hung in the air like an axe. Inga didn't dare bring it up again after her first failed attempt, but time kept passing. 2 weeks ran out. The third was coming to an end. There was no talk of searching for a new place, no talk of a new mortgage. Linda had firmly settled into the living room and seemed to have no plans to go anywhere. On Saturday, exactly 2 weeks after her mother-in-law arrived, Inga finally decided. She waited for a moment when she and Carl were alone in the kitchen. Linda had gone to a friend's place, and for a few hours the apartment fell into an unfamiliar, blessed silence. Inga washed the dishes, poured herself and her husband a cup of plain bagged tea. She didn't buy anything else. Now sat across from him at the table. Carl was reading the news on his phone. "Carl," she started as gently as she could. "We need to talk." He didn't look up. "It's been 2 weeks. Your mom said she needed that time to sort things out with the money. Any news?" Carl slowly tore his eyes away from the screen. His face was unreadable. "What news?" "Well, the money from selling the apartment. Did she transfer it? Can we start looking for a new place?" He set the phone down on the table. Slowly, with some kind of ominous thud. "Inga, I don't understand why you're in such a rush." "This isn't a rush, Carl. It's been 2 weeks. That's what we agreed on." "Nobody agreed on anything." His voice got harder. "Mom will stay with us as long as she needs. As for the money, do you even understand what kind of amount that is? You think it's that simple to transfer several $100,000 from one account to another? Banks check every transaction. It's anti-money laundering. It can take a month, maybe even 2. 2 months? Everything inside Inga went cold. "But she said what did she say?" "She's an older woman. She doesn't understand those financial details." "What did I tell you?" He looked at her with a heavy, impassive stare, and there wasn't a drop of the warmth she loved so much in it. "It can take a month or 2. Stop pressuring me and Mom. She sold her only apartment for our future, yours and mine, and you're counting days like a prison guard. Aren't you ashamed, Inga?" "Ashamed?" Inga wanted to laugh in his face. He should be ashamed for how easily he'd let a hostile person into their world and allowed that person to destroy everything they'd built. He should be ashamed for not seeing, or not wanting to see, how his wife was slowly suffocating in her own home. She stood up silently, took her empty mug, and demonstratively poured the last of the cold tea into the sink. Then she rinsed it, dried it carefully, and put it back in its place. That simple mechanical action helped her keep from snapping, from screaming, from throwing the mug at the wall. She would restore order. At least on one shelf in the kitchen cabinet. "I understand you," she said evenly, without turning around. 2 months. Fine. She walked into the bedroom and closed the door firmly behind her. For the first time in years of living together, she locked it from the inside. The click of the mechanism sounded painfully loud in the silence that followed. She pressed her forehead to the cool wood of the door. 2 months. That wasn't a time frame. It was a sentence. The next week turned into a Cold War. She and Carl barely spoke. He made a point of spending his evenings in the living room next to his mother. They watched TV together, drank tea, and quietly discussed their own little things. Inga felt like a ghost, drifting down the hallway from the bedroom to the kitchen and back again. Her bedroom, her little fortress inside the bigger fortress that had already been surrendered to the enemy, became the only place she could breathe. She brought food in there, worked on her laptop sitting on the bed, and only came out when absolutely necessary. Carl knocked on the door a few times, but she either didn't answer or told him she was busy. He didn't push. It seemed like he was fine with everything. He got his loving, understanding mom, and his wife was somewhere over there, behind the door, not getting in the way. One evening like that, coming home from work especially exhausted, Inga walked into the apartment and froze in the doorway. Something was wrong. The air was the same, that suffocating mix of valerian and Chanel No. 5. The TV in the living room droned at its usual volume, but something had subtly changed in the geometry of the space itself. She walked into the living room, and her heart dropped into her shoes. Her dresser. That same one made of glossy white MDF that she and Carl had assembled 2 nights in a row, following that stupid instruction manual. It was in its place, but it was different, foreign, empty. The porcelain elephants, 7 of them, from big to tiny, a gift from her late grandmother, were gone. Her grandma, Irene, had brought them back from every trip around the country. This one from San Francisco, this one from New Orleans, and the smallest, her favorite, from Boston. They were ridiculous, old-fashioned, but they were her childhood, her connection to someone she'd loved beyond measure. Each elephant had some chipped detail: an ear, a tusk, the tip of a trunk. Grandma used to say those were scars from long journeys. Inga could stare at them for hours, remembering her grandmother's stories. Now, in their place, centered perfectly on the flawlessly polished surface, lay a cross-stitched doily rough, yellowish fabric covered in slightly crooked stitches. In the middle of the design were two swans gliding across a blue lake. Their necks curved, forming something like a heart. One swan's eye was noticeably bigger than the others, making it look slightly deranged. Olive-colored roses decorated the edges. It was a triumph of bad taste, the pure distillation of everything Inga hated. "Do you like it?" Linda's satisfied voice came from behind her. She walked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a daisy-print apron. "I'm making it cozy. Because, sweetheart, you've got it in here like a barracks. Everything's white, smooth, no soul. This way you can tell right away there's a woman living in the house." Inga slowly turned around. Her voice was barely audible. Where are my elephants?" "Oh, those dust collectors," her mother-in-law waved it off carelessly. "I put them in a box and put them away. In the closet. Why should they gather dust? Memories are supposed to live in your heart, not on a dresser. And the doily, it's handmade. I embroidered it when I was young. In sewing classes. I saved it for a special occasion. And now I decided to give it to you, for your new home." She was glowing, waiting for gratitude. She truly believed she had done something good. That her pitiful little craft was worth more than Inga's memories, more than her feelings. Inga didn't say a word. She turned around, walked to the closet, and opened the door. On the top shelf, behind a stack of old magazines, stood a shoebox. She took it out and opened it. Her elephants, her small, life-worn travelers, were carelessly piled together. The big elephant lay on its side, pressing the smallest one against the wall. It seemed to Inga that they were looking at her with silent reproach. She gently took them out one by one and put them back on the dresser, pushing the ugly doily to the very edge. "What are you doing?" Linda gasped, her face stretching out. "I was trying for you, making it cozy, and you dashed this is my home," Inga said clearly, arranging the elephants in their familiar order, from biggest to smallest. "And I will decide myself how to make it cozy. And your doilies, Linda, embroider them for your own home." "But I don't have a home anymore," her mother-in-law screeched, tears ringing in her voice. "I sold it so you ungrateful people could live like human beings, and you throw my own gift back in my face. Carl, my son, come here, look at what she's doing." Carl appeared in the living room doorway. He was in a t-shirt and sweatpants, having just changed out of his work clothes. His gaze darted from his tearful mother to Inga, frozen by the dresser. "What's going on here?" She wanted to throw away my doily," Linda sobbed, clutching her hands to her enormous chest. "She said this is her house, not mine. She's kicking me out, son." "I didn't say that," Inga said in an icy tone. "I said this is my home, and I will decide what stands on my dresser. Your dust collectors or mine." Carl stepped up to the dresser. He looked at the elephants, then at the doily Inga had shoved to the corner. Then he raised his eyes to Inga. "Inga, why are you doing this?" Mom meant well. And then he did the one thing Inga would never forgive him for. Carefully, with 2 fingers, he picked up her smallest Boston elephant and put it back into the box. Then the next one. And so on, all 7 of them. He moved methodically, calmly, as if he were just clearing dishes off a table. Then he took the doily with the swans, smoothed it out, and placed it back in the center of the dresser. "It really does look nicer this way, Inga," he said quietly, not looking her in the eyes. "Cozier, somehow." Inga's breath caught. This wasn't just betrayal. It was public humiliation. He, her husband, had shown her her place in front of his mother. Her things, her memories, her feelings, all of it meant nothing. The only things that mattered were Mom's feelings and Mom's doily. The box with her past, with her grandmother, with her childhood stood on the floor, and 2 ugly swans ruled the dresser. "Got it," she managed to breathe out. She took the box of elephants and carried it into the bedroom. Closed the door. Locked it. She didn't cry. The tears were gone. Inside there was only scorched earth, covered in ash. She sat on the bed, opened the box, and stared at her elephants for a long time. They weren't just porcelain figurines. They were a symbol of herself. And she had just been just as neatly packed into a box and shoved aside on a high shelf so she wouldn't get in the way of creating coziness. That night she didn't sleep. She heard the voices die down behind the door, heard the TV being turned off. She waited for Carl to come, to knock, to apologize, to say he'd been wrong. But he didn't come. Around midnight she heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Someone went to the kitchen, drank some water. Then the footsteps returned to the living room. Not the bedroom. The living room. He stayed there to sleep, on the couch, next to his mother. In the morning she decided to talk. One last time. She knew it was probably pointless, but she had to try. For the years they'd spent together, for the apartment they'd built together, for the guy who once made her pancakes. She waited until Linda, putting on her raspberry tracksuit, left for her morning walk to get some fresh air. Carl was sitting in the kitchen, gloomily stirring sugar into his cup with a spoon. He looked sleep-deprived and angry. "Carl," Inga sat down across from him. "I want to talk." "About what?" "About how you threw a tantrum over nothing yesterday and hurt my mother," he snapped. "About how I feel like a stranger in my own home," she said, ignoring his jab. Her voice was shaking, but she tried to speak firmly. "I feel like I don't exist here. My things, my habits, my feelings, all of it has been pushed aside. Since your mom arrived, you stopped being my husband. You became her son. And you choose her every time, not me." "That's not true," he shot back. "I'm just trying to keep peace in the family." "What family, Carl?" She gave a bitter half-smile. "There is no family anymore. There's you and your mom. And I'm somewhere on the sidelines. Yesterday you slept in the living room. Do you understand what that means? Where was I supposed to sleep?" He raised his voice. "With you, after you brought my mother to tears? She's an elderly woman, she has heart problems, and you attacked her over some stupid figurines." "They're not stupid figurines," her voice broke into a shout. "They're a memory of my grandmother, the only thing I have left of her. And you put them in a box with your own hands. Because you're acting like a selfish woman," he yelled, jumping up from his chair. The cup on the table jolted, spilling tea. "You only think about yourself, your feelings, your elephants, your tea. You don't care that my mother sacrificed everything for us. You just don't want her here, admit it." "Yes, I don't," she shouted back, and it was the truth. Bitter, freeing truth. "I don't want her here. I don't want to live in my own apartment and feel guilty for every breath. I want my life back. Our life. The one we had before she came." "Oh, so that's how it is." His face twisted with rage. He stepped right up to her, looming over her. "You hate my mother, is that it? She's in your way?" He grabbed her arm just above the elbow. His fingers squeezed so hard she cried out in pain. This wasn't the Carl she knew. His eyes were angry. "Let go, you're hurting me," she gasped, trying to pull away. "Listen to me when I'm talking to you," he hissed. "Mom will live here as long as it takes. And if something doesn't suit you..." At that moment, a key turned in the lock. The door opened, and Linda appeared in the doorway. She froze when she saw the scene. Her son's face twisted with rage, his hand gripping his wife's shoulder, Inga's frightened eyes. Something like satisfaction flickered across Linda's face. But it was instantly replaced by fear and wounded offense. "My son, what's going on here? Are you fighting because of me?" "Yes. I'll pack my things right now and go to the train station." Carl immediately let go of Inga's arm, as if he'd been burned. He turned to his mother, and his entire face changed. The anger vanished, replaced by guilty tenderness. "Mommy, what are you saying? You're not going anywhere. No one is kicking you out." He hurried over to her and put his arms around her shoulders. "We were just talking loudly, that's all." "I heard everything," Linda sobbed, wiping her dry eyes. She doesn't want to see me. I'm a stranger to her. I'll leave, son. Don't destroy your family because of me. You're not destroying anything, Carl said firmly, shooting Inga a scorching look. You're staying here. This is your home too. He led his mother into the living room, sat her down on the couch, started calming her, saying something soft and soothing. Inga was left alone in the kitchen. On her arm, where his fingers had been, a bruise was slowly blooming. She stared at it, and it felt like watching a symptom of a fatal illness. This was the end. She understood it with absolute clarity. The conversation had failed. The wall between them had turned into concrete. And that night, he didn't come to the bedroom again. He took his pillow, his blanket, and went to the living room. He made his final choice. From that moment on, an icy cold settled into the apartment. Inga stopped trying to talk to Carl. She lived her own, separate life. She came home, ate dinner alone in the kitchen, trying not to run into either her husband or her mother-in-law, and locked herself in the bedroom. She began to realize that Linda was carrying out a systematic, methodical siege. The goal of that siege was simple: to drive Inga out of her own apartment, or at the very least, completely bend her to her will. One Wednesday, Inga started feeling unwell at work. Her head ached, and she ran a slight fever. Her boss, seeing how pale she looked, sent her home. She was glad for the chance to be alone in silence while no one was there. She left work at 3 in the afternoon, stopped by a pharmacy for fever medicine, and went home, dreaming only of her bed and sleep. When she reached her floor, she heard voices coming from behind the door. Loud, female voices and laughter. Brazen laughter. She tensed, slid the key into the lock, and turned it quietly. The scene in the living room made her freeze. On their couch, the same one they were still paying off, sat Linda and 2 of her friends. One was just as heavy-set, wearing a lilac dress. The other was skinny and twitchy, with brightly painted lips. On the coffee table were 3 cups, a little dish with cheap hard candies, and an open pack of cigarettes. Thick bluish smoke hung in the air. The skinny friend was just taking a drag, blowing smoke rings toward their new stretch ceiling. And I tell him, she was ranting in a gravelly, smoke-worn voice, if you think I'm going to pick up your socks all over the apartment, you've got the wrong address, and I put his little suitcase right outside the door. All 3 burst into loud laughter. Good for you, Tammy, show those mutts who's boss, the lilac-clad friend boomed approvingly. Linda was beaming. She was the mistress here, the queen of her small, conquered kingdom. They didn't notice Inga frozen in the hallway right away. Tammy saw her first. She choked on the smoke and started coughing. Oh, Linda, and who's this? Linda turned around. The joy on her face shifted into poorly concealed irritation. Oh. Inga. You're home already. Why so early? I'm sick, Inga replied dully, taking in the mess on the table. Empty candy wrappers, crumbs, ash in a coffee saucer. And that smelled the smell of cheap cigarettes and presents. Her home had been desecrated. Oh, you poor thing, her mother-in-law sang out, without a hint of sympathy. Well, go lie down and rest. We'll sit here quietly with the girls, we won't bother you. This is Tammy, meet her, and this is Rose. My friends. Tammy and Rose looked her up and down appraisingly. So this is the shrew who's poisoning our Linda's life, was written plainly in their eyes. Inga didn't say anything. She silently walked into her bedroom and closed the door. The rage inside her was so strong it made her ears ring. She flung the window open, letting in icy air. She paced the room from corner to corner like a caged tiger. Guests in her home were smoking without permission. This was no longer just a violation of boundaries. It was a show of force. I'm the boss here. I can bring whoever I want and do whatever I want. And you are nobody. That evening, when Carl came home from work, Inga met him in the hallway. The guests were gone, but the smell of cigarettes lingered, soaked into the curtains and the couch upholstery. We had guests, she said without preamble. I could tell by the smell, he grimaced. Mom's friend stopped by. They were smoking. In the living room. Carl sighed. That same tired, irritated sigh. Inga, I'll talk to Mom. I'll ask her not to let them smoke in the apartment anymore. It's not just about the smoking, Carl. She was barely holding herself together. This is my home. Why does your mother bring her friends here when I'm not around? Why do they act like this is their territory? What's the big deal? He started getting heated. Her friends came over for tea. What, is she a prisoner here? She's not allowed to see people? You're making a mountain out of a molehill again. I'm tired of your constant nitpicking. This isn't nitpicking. It's an invasion. That's my mother, he shouted. And she will live here and see whoever she wants. And if you don't like something, the door is right there. He pointed toward the front door. And at that moment, something inside Inga finally broke. Or maybe, on the contrary, hardened, turning into steel. She looked at him, and his face twisted with rage, and felt nothing. No love. No hurt. Just cold, detached curiosity. Who is this person? And what is he doing in her apartment? She didn't answer. She turned silently and went into the bedroom. The door's right there? Fine. She remembered that. From that day on, Inga started listening. She no longer got into arguments or tried to prove anything. She became a shadow in her own home. And shadows sometimes hear things that aren't meant for their ears. In the evenings, when Carl and his mother thought she was sitting in the bedroom with headphones on, she would crack the door open and listen to their quiet conversations in the living room. And what she heard was worse than open fights. Linda was methodically, drop by drop, poisoning her son's mind. She doesn't appreciate you at all, my son, she complained in a quiet, suffering voice. I can see it, you're working 2 jobs, and what about her? Buying herself new dresses, cheese at $20 a pound. She's not a homemaker, she doesn't protect the family hearth. In our day, we counted every penny and supported our husbands. Mom, don't start, Carl replied wearily, but there was no resistance in his voice. I'm not starting, I'm worried about you, Linda sniffled. You've gotten so thin, so pale. Everything rests on your shoulders alone, and she doesn't even see it. She wastes money when she could be saving up for a car for you. A man without a car isn't a man. Inga listened, and the ice in her soul grew thicker and harder. She could see this poison at work. Carl was becoming more irritable, more often reproaching her for small expenses. Buying a new dress on sale turned into a scandal. Going to a cafe with a friend turned into an interrogation. Every penny counts for us, and you're running around to restaurants, he snapped at her once, even though she'd paid for her own coffee. Linda, sitting next to him, shook her head sympathetically and added more valerian to her son's tea. Inga stopped fighting. She switched into total energy-saving mode, like an animal hibernating for the winter. She waited. She didn't know exactly what for, but she felt that something had to happen. Some final drop that would overflow the cup and wash away this sticky, suffocating swamp. She began to notice small details. Linda, despite her constant complaints about being broke and her tiny pension, never asked Carl for money. She bought her favorite cheap candies, her cigarettes, her herbal tinctures. That meant she had some unaccounted for funds of her own. Inga simply stored these observations away, without drawing conclusions yet. The denouement came suddenly, as it always does. It was an ordinary gray Tuesday. In the morning, Linda locked herself in the bathroom for a long time. Her favorite pastime. She could sit there for hours, humming songs from her youth and creating unbearable steam in the enclosed space. Her cell phone, an old, worn smartphone with a cracked screen, was left charging in the hallway. It always charged there, plugged into the outlet by the front door. Inga walked past it, heading to the kitchen to pour herself some water before leaving for work. At that moment, the phone screen lit up, showing a message preview. Inga hadn't intended to read it. She glanced at it in passing and was about to walk on, but her brain snagged on familiar letters and numbers. She stopped. Took a step back. On the screen, glowing with cold blue light, were the lines that changed everything. It was a system notification from the bank. Bank of America. Dear Linda, your 36-month fixed deposit account opened on November 3, 2024 has been credited with $250,000. Early withdrawal not permitted, $250,000. Inga stood there, staring at the numbers. The world around her shrank to the size of a small glowing rectangle. The screen went dark. She reached out and touched it. The screen lit up again, showing the same message. She reread it once more. And again. Term of deposit, 36 months. 3 years. No withdrawals allowed. It was a knockout. A punch to the gut that knocked the air out of her lungs. She stood there, leaning against the wall in the dim hallway, trying to breathe. The smell of valerian that had soaked into the apartment now seemed like the smell of Lies, a thick, nauseating stench of betrayal. So there were no 2 weeks for paperwork, no 2 months for bank checks, no down payment for a mortgage for the young couple. The money from selling the apartment had been, on the very day, at the very hour she crossed the threshold of their home, securely locked away in a long-term deposit. Earning interest. A deposit that couldn't be touched for 3 years. Money no one ever intended to give them. The entire picture instantly snapped together into one grotesque puzzle. Complaints about having no money. Talk about every dollar counting. Manipulation aimed at making Carl see Inga as a spender. It was all a game. A performance staged for a single purpose: to live in the daughter-in-law's apartment with all expenses covered, while setting aside her pension and earning interest on $250,000, while her son and that ungrateful girl broke their backs paying the mortgage. From the bathroom came a satisfied grunt and the sound of splashing water. Linda was finishing her routine. Inga recoiled from the phone as if it were a poisonous snake. She silently slipped into her bedroom and closed the door. She wasn't shaking. On the contrary, a ringing, dead silence settled inside her. The rage that had been boiling in her for all these weeks suddenly cooled, crystallized, turning into something hard and sharp, like a shard of ice. She sat down on the edge of the bed. Carl. What about Carl? Did he know? Was he in on it with his mother? Or was he just a naive, fooled mama's boy who genuinely believed in her sacrifice? Anger replayed his words in her head, his behavior, his irritation whenever she asked about the money, his accusations of being materialistic, the endless "Mom is doing this for us." He didn't know. And she was almost sure of it. He wasn't that good an actor, he was just weak, spineless. He chose to believe the beautiful fairy tale about a heroic mother because it was easier than admitting that his own mother was a con artist and his wife was right. He let himself be deceived and made her suffer for it. That day at work, Inga couldn't focus. The numbers in the reports blurred, her co-workers' words sounded as if they were coming through thick glass. She performed her duties mechanically, but her entire being was consumed by a single thought. What should she do? Tell Carl everything? Show him the imaginary screenshot she'd taken with her eyes? He wouldn't believe her. He'd say she made it all up, that she hated his mother and was willing to lie about anything to smear her. He'd defend her. He always did. Confront Linda? She'd start screaming, clutch her heart, accuse Inga of slander. And Carl would once again be comforting his poor, offended mother. No. An open confrontation was useless. She would lose. She needed more than just proof. She needed a move that would leave neither of them a single chance to justify themselves. For the first time in many weeks, coming home, Inga felt not disgust but a predatory, vicious interest. She walked into the apartment with a polite, cold, expressionless smile. Good evening, Linda. Has Carl come home yet? Not yet, sweetheart. Her mother-in-law, sitting in front of the TV, tore herself away from her talk show. Will you have dinner? I fried some cutlets today. Chicken breast. Less greasy, better for your figure. The cutlets were dry and bland. Inga ate one, praised them, very tasty, thank you for caring, and went to her room. She was no longer a victim. She was a hunter, lying in wait for her prey to make a mistake. And the prey didn't keep her waiting. Feeling complete impunity, Linda grew bolder. Where before she had merely commented on Inga's purchases, now she went on the offensive. That Saturday, when all three of them were in the kitchen, she started a conversation that, in her mind, was meant to be the finishing shot. My dears, I've been thinking, she began in a honeyed tone, pouring cheap tea into the cups. We're one big family now. Living together under one roof. But your budget is somehow separate. That's not right. Not family-like. Inga silently raised her eyes to her. Carl tensed. So here's my proposal, her mother-in-law continued, not noticing or ignoring the tension. Let's organize, so to speak, a common fund, a shared cash box. You get your paychecks, and all the money goes into one box, and my pension goes there too, every last dollar. And I, as the elder, as the more experienced one, will keep the records, hand out money for expenses, groceries, transportation. So nothing extra gets spent. So we can save up for something big. That way we'll collect for your new apartment much faster. Inga almost laughed. What a brilliant, what a shamelessly simple scheme. Get access to all their money, control every last penny, and at the same time calmly collect interest on her own bank deposit. It wasn't even fraud anymore. It was a work of art. Mom, I don't know, Carl mumbled, clearly uncomfortable. We've kind of gotten used to dash exactly, you've gotten used to throwing money down the drain, Linda jumped in immediately, going on the attack. Inga hear their address, or a cafe, or her fancy imported cheeses. But this way everything will be under control, every penny accounted for. I'll give you a report at the end of the month where what went. Everything honest. She looked at Inga with a victorious smile. She was sure she'd backed her into a corner. Refuse and you're openly going against the family, against the common good. Agree and you're voluntarily putting a financial collar on your own neck. Inga took a sip of her cool tea. She looked straight into her mother-in-law's small watery eyes. That's not going to happen, Linda, she said quietly, but so clearly that silence fell over the kitchen. What do you mean, not going to happen? Linda blurted, stunned. My paycheck is my paycheck. I get it on my card and I spend it the way I see fit, same as Carl. We're adults, and we're fully capable of controlling our own spending. But I'm just trying to help. The offended notes rang in her voice, rehearsed dozens of times. I'm doing this for you. Thanks, but no, Inga cut her off. She stood up from the table. Inga, what do you think you're doing? Carl exploded. Mom is offering us a genius plan to save faster, and you what? You don't trust us? Your own family? I don't trust this idea, she replied calmly, looking at her husband. My money stays with me. Period. She went into the bedroom and closed the door. Behind her she could hear the muffled conversation, Linda's sniffles, Carl's irritated voice. She knew what he was thinking now that she was selfish, greedy, hiding money from the family. Fine. It didn't matter anymore. She'd won this battle, but she knew the war wasn't over. An opponent who gets pushed back will lie low, and then strike from another side. That's exactly what happened. A few days passed. Linda walked around looking offended, sighing theatrically and complaining to Carl about her high blood pressure. Inga ignored the performance. She stayed alert. She could feel something brewing, something final. And then that day came. Wednesday. Inga woke up with a headache so bad the white walls of the office seemed unbearably bright, and the hum of the computers drilled into her brain. A real, full-blown migraine. By lunch she realized she couldn't go on. Her face was pale, her vision was darkening. The department head took one look at her and sent her home himself. Inga, go lie down. You look, frankly, not fit for work. You will report tomorrow. She was endlessly grateful. The thought that she would come to an empty, quiet apartment, lie in her bed, pull the curtains, and just fall asleep was. Carl was at work until 7. Linda usually watched her shows in the living room at that time, but at least the bedroom would be quiet. She stopped by a pharmacy, bought strong painkillers, and 40 minutes later she was at her building. She rode the elevator up, anticipating silence. She opened the shared vestibule door, took out her key to the apartment. And she heard voices. Not from the living room. The voices were coming from deeper inside the apartment, from her and Carl's bedroom. One voice was painfully familiar, the soft, coaxing voice of Linda. The other was a woman's voice, with a kind of shrill edge to it. Inga's heart skipped. The migraine vanished instantly, swept away by a wave of icy terror and a sick premonition. Quietly, barely breathing, she slipped the key into the lock and turned it as slowly as she could. The door opened soundlessly a couple of inches. She peeked through the crack. The entryway was empty. The voices came from the bedroom, the door to it closed tight but not locked. Inga took off her boots, set them on the mat, trying not to make a sound. On tiptoe, like a thief in her own home, she went up to the bedroom door and listened. "See, the room is big, bright," Linda was saying. "And this is the sunny side. In the morning and until lunchtime the sun comes right through the window. It's very good for your mood." The second voice replied vaguely. "And the closet? Will there be enough space?" "I have a lot of clothes." "The closet is big, very roomy," her mother-in-law assured her. "Of course we'll clear out half, get rid of a bunch of junk. One whole section with shelves and a hanging rod will be more than enough for you." Inga pressed her ear to the door. Her vision swam. They were talking about her closet, about her bedroom. What was happening? "The bed is solid, the mattress is almost new. Don't mind the bedding being so plain. My daughter-in-law has no taste. You'll put yours on, something pretty, and you'll feel like a queen." Something inside Inga collapsed. She pushed the door open. The scene was surreal. In the middle of her bedroom stood Linda, flushed, energized, showing their bed to an unfamiliar woman of about 40, with bleached hair and a predatory expression. The woman skeptically pinched their comforter. When Linda saw Inga in the doorway, she didn't look embarrassed. Not a trace of surprise or guilt crossed her face, only mild irritation, like Inga had interrupted important negotiations. "Oh, Inga, you're already home. And we're just meeting Evelyn here." The unfamiliar woman Evelyn gave Inga a cold, appraising look from head to toe. Inga was silent. She couldn't say a word. She just stared at them, and in her head one single phrase pounded from what she'd heard through the door. And she needed to hear the ending. "Sorry, I don't really understand what's going on here," she finally forced out. Her voice sounded wooden. And then Linda, apparently deciding there was nothing left to hide, said the sentence that became the final nail in the coffin of their family. She took her guest by the elbow and, looking not at Inga but at Evelyn, spoke in a practiced realtor tone. "So like I'm saying, the room is private, quiet. The neighbors, that is, us, are calm, we don't drink. We won't do registration, of course, but a lease absolutely. And it's only $1,200 a month, plus electricity and water by the meter. For this neighborhood it's a great deal, right? It'll be a little extra money for the kids. A little extra money for the kids. $1,200 a month for her bedroom." In that moment, Inga felt nothing. No anger. No hurt. No humiliation. There was total, absolute emptiness. As if her soul had been pulled out, leaving only the shell. Silently, without looking at them, she turned around and walked out of the room. She passed through the living room, past the ugly swan doily that now looked like a symbol of all this absurdity. She flung open the glass door and stepped onto the balcony. Cold November air slapped her in the face. The city below, endless lines of cars crawling, tiny figures of people hurrying along on their way somewhere. Inga took a deep breath. Then another, and another. She was trembling. But it wasn't the tremble of weakness, it was the tremble of a spring wound tight to its limit. She looked down at her hands, her fingers were trembling slightly. She clenched them into fists so hard her nails dug into her palms. The pain sobered her. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. Her fingers barely obeyed her, but she found the right number in her contacts. "Dad." She hit call. The rings felt endless. "Yes, sweetheart," her father's calm, low voice came through the phone. Inga closed her eyes. She forced her voice to stay even. No tears. No hysteria. She didn't have the right to them. Not now. "Dad," she said, and her voice didn't shake. "Please come over. Right now." There was a second of silence on the other end. Gregory was a man who didn't ask unnecessary questions. If his daughter, his always strong, independent Inga, was calling in the middle of a workday and asking him to come over in that tone, then something truly terrible had happened. "I'm on my way," he said shortly and hung up. Inga lowered the phone. She stood on the balcony for another minute, looking at the gray, cloud-covered sky. The trembling faded. In its place came an icy, crystal-clear calm. She understood everything. She had decided everything. The performance was over. Now came the finale. She went back into the apartment. From the entryway came hurried footsteps and muffled voices. Evelyn was clearly retreating in a rush. Linda was saying something after her about thinking it over and calling later. Inga walked into the kitchen. She passed her mother-in-law standing in the hallway with a confused, angry face, as if Linda were just another piece of furniture. She poured herself a glass of water from the filter and drank it in one gulp. The cold water burned her throat. What was that? What was that supposed to be? Linda hissed at her back. Why did you scare that woman off? She was practically agreeing. Inga slowly turned around. She looked at her mother-in-law with a long, unblinking stare. And said nothing. Just looked. There was something in her gaze that made Linda falter, shrink back, and fall silent. Inga sat down on a chair in the living room, directly across from the dresser with the swan doily. She folded her hands in her lap and began to wait. She wasn't waiting for Carl. She wasn't waiting for apologies. She was waiting for the sound of the elevator that would bring to her floor the one person in the world who had never betrayed her. She was waiting for justice, and she knew it was already on its way. The hour stretched like melted cheese stick, slow, suffocating. Inga sat in the living room on a hard chair she had dragged in from the kitchen. Sitting on their couch, desecrated by strangers and lies, was physically impossible. She stared at the dresser, at the ugly doily with the deranged swan. That piece of fabric had become the embodiment of everything that had happened, a symbol of takeover, bad taste, and brazen entitlement. She waited. Her body was still, but inside everything vibrated like a string pulled to its absolute limit. She had no idea how much time had passed since her call to her father. 15 minutes. Half an hour. Time had lost its familiar shape. Every knock, every noise outside made her flinch, but it wasn't the elevator. Linda, recovering from the initial shock, began circling the room like a vulture over prey. First she tried to press on pity. Inga, why aren't you saying anything? You're scaring me, sweetheart. My blood pressure's up, my heart's racing. I was just trying to do what's best. So what if I brought a woman over? It's still money for the family, for you, for your mortgage. You yourself said money was tight. I'm running around like a squirrel on a wheel trying to help, and you. Inga stayed silent. She stared at the swan. It seemed to her that it was winking at her maliciously with its crookedly embroidered eye. Seeing that pity wasn't working, her mother-in-law went on the offensive. Her voice took on a metallic edge. You think I didn't get it? You did this on purpose. Came home early on purpose to ruin everything. You just can't stand that I'm trying to put the house in order, get the budget under control. You were too stingy to let $1,200 a month slide. With a room like that, we could have charged $1,500 easy. Inga remained silent. The string inside her tightened even more, ringing at an ultrasonic pitch her mother-in-law couldn't hear. Why are you standing there like a statue? Linda shrieked, losing the last of her self-control. You should be thanking Carl that he married you at all, poor thing, with a mortgage and no dowry. And now what, you turn your nose up? You want to drive his own mother out of the house? You think I don't see the way you look at me? Like I'm your enemy? She stepped right up to Inga. She smelled of sweat, valerian, and rage. I'm calling Carl right now. I'll tell him everything. How you humiliated me, how you scared off a decent woman. We'll see what he says to you. He'll show you where your place is. She pulled out her battered phone, the very one that had opened Inga's eyes that morning to the full depth of the deception. With fingers shaking from fury, she started searching for her son's number. Inga didn't move. Let her call. Let her. That was even better. Let them all be here when the show began. He came into the apartment tired, a bag slung over his shoulder, and immediately walked into a storm of his mother's sobbing. My son, my dear boy, you're finally home. Linda threw herself at him, clutching the sleeve of his jacket. You have no idea what she's done. What a disgrace. What humiliation. Carl darted from his sobbing mother to Inga's motionless figure in the living room. His face instantly hardened with anger. What happened? He snapped, tossing his jacket onto the dresser, right on top of the swan doily. She. Linda choked on her words. I found a way to help us. Found a woman decent, single. I wanted to rent out our bedroom to her, just for a while we're all living together. $1,200, son. $1,200 a month coming in. And she burst in like a fury, screamed at her, threw her out, humiliated me in front of a stranger, said this was her house and she's the boss here. Carl slowly turned to Inga. He walked toward her across the room, and every step carried a threat. He stopped right in front of her. Is that true? You kicked out the person my mother found? Inga raised her eyes to him. Calm. Cold. Empty. She was trying to rent out our bedroom, Carl. Our bed. While we're at work. So what? His voice broke into a shout. He didn't hear the absurdity of her words. He only heard what his mother wanted him to hear. Mom was trying to make money for us, for our family, and instead of being grateful, you start scandals. Who do you think you are to decide what gets done in this house? I'm the owner of this apartment, Inga said just as evenly and quietly. That fact seemed to be the only thing still keeping her afloat. You're nobody, he hissed in her face. His eyes burned with rage. Spit sprayed onto her cheek. You're the problem. Ever since Mom got here, all you do is poison our lives. Always unhappy, always with that sour face. Mom's right, you're just a selfish woman who doesn't want to consider anyone else. He took another step, looming over her. He was furious, absolutely convinced of his righteousness, fed by his mother's lies. In that moment, he disgusted her. Physically. This wasn't her husband. This was a raging stranger defending his female. You're the one who isn't listening, Carl, Inga said, and for the first time there was steel in her voice. Your mother is a con artist. What? He choked with outrage. Behind him, Linda let out a theatrical gasp and clutched at her heart. Shut up, Inga. Don't you dare talk about my mother like that. She was never going to give us the money from the apartment, Inga went on, looking straight into his eyes, seeing the anger and disbelief sloshing there. She put it into a fixed deposit for 3 years. $250,000. I saw the bank text this morning. For a second, silence hung in the room. Carl stared at her, and something like doubt flickered across his face just for a moment. But Linda was an experienced player. Son, she's lying, she screamed from behind his back. She made it all up. She hates me, she wants to drive a wedge between us. Just look at her, how angry she is, how cruel. Carl shook himself, driving the doubt away. Believing his mother's lie was easier than facing the horrifying truth. You lying bitch, he spat. You'll do anything to smear my mother. I don't believe you. Not a single word you say. At that exact moment, the doorbell rang in the entryway. Short, insistent, confident. It sounded like a gong announcing the end of a round. All three froze. Carl turned toward the door. Linda looked at it in fear. Inga slowly stood up from the chair. A faint, strange smile touched her lips. Go open it, Carl, she said. I think it's for you. He looked at her, confused, then at the door. The bell rang again, just as sharp and demanding. Carl went to open it. Gregory was standing on the threshold. He wasn't huge, but there was something solid and unshakable about him, like an old oak tree. Calm, heavyset, wearing a high-quality dark gray cashmere coat that probably cost as much as 3 of Carl's paychecks. He didn't step inside right away. He paused on the threshold for a second, surveying the scene with a heavy, attentive gaze. His eyes lingered on Linda's tear-streaked face, slid over Carl's face twisted with anger, and stopped on Inga. There was no question in his look, only silent support. He understood everything. Dad, come in, Inga said. Gregory stepped inside slowly, with dignity. The air in the apartment instantly changed. It became dense, charged. He was the one in charge here now. Oh, hello, Gregory. We weren't expecting you. Linda fussed and chirped, trying to switch gears on the fly, slipping into her hospitable matchmaker mode. Come in, take off your shoes, would you like some tea? I'll put the kettle on right now. It was as if he didn't see or hear her at all. He slowly, unhurriedly took off his coat and carefully hung it on the hook. Then he turned, but his gaze was fixed not on the fawning woman in front of him, but on Carl, frozen in the doorway to the living room. Young man. Gregory's voice was even, almost indifferent, and that made it frightening. I don't understand why there are strangers in my daughter's apartment. It was said without pressure, as if he were asking the time. But the effect was like a slap. Carl faltered, flushed. He opened his mouth but couldn't get a word out. This is my mom, Linda, he finally stammered. She's helping us. She's staying with us temporarily. Helping? Gregory tilted his head slightly, as if he'd heard something very amusing. He took a step into the living room, his shoes making no sound on the laminate. He scanned the room, his gaze pausing on the swan doily, then returning to Carl. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke so quietly that Linda had to fall silent to hear him. She's helping you breathe the air in this apartment? Helping you walk on this floor? Helping you look out this window? My daughter bought this apartment. I gave the money for the down payment. She did the renovations herself, killing herself after work. Every single thing here was bought with her money or with your joint, hard-earned money. So how exactly is a stranger helping here a woman who, as I can see, has already started imposing her own rules? Gregory's gaze dropped to the doily again. He walked over to the dresser, delicately lifted it by one corner with 2 fingers, and dropped it on the floor. Linda shrieked as if someone had stepped on her foot. How dare you? That's handmade. A gift. Gregory ignored her again. He was looking at Carl. Only at him. And something very cold appeared in his eyes. I'll repeat the question, young man. Why has your mommy moved into my daughter's apartment? Doesn't she have a place of her own? The question, delivered in the same even, deadly polite tone, hung in the air. Mommy. Not mother. Not Linda. Mommy. It was a public, merciless humiliation. Inga saw Carl's Adam's apple jerk. She felt an explosion coming. And she didn't want to see it. She turned and quickly went into the bedroom, just in case. She closed the door behind her but didn't lock it. She leaned against it, squeezing her eyes shut, and she was right to do so. A couple of seconds later, a piercing, breaking shriek of Linda's voice came from the hallway. You old bastard, I'll dash, then the sound of frantic shuffling. Inga realized her mother-in-law, driven into a frenzy, had lunged at her father. Then came a crash. A dull thud, the sound of objects scattering across the floor, and a short, pained cry that turned into a muted groan. Inga froze, afraid to breathe. An overwhelming silence filled the apartment. After half a minute, she heard quiet, dragging footsteps. It was Carl. He walked past her door deeper into the hallway, toward their closet. Then came the sound of a zipper being undone. The sound of a travel bag being taken down from the top shelf. Inga waited another 5 minutes. The silence was absolute. She slowly turned the handle and cracked the door open. The hallway was empty. On the floor, near the threshold, lay the crumpled swan doily. And right by the front door stood a cardboard shoebox. The very one. The box with her elephants. In her furious rush, Linda had clearly tripped over it without noticing. Inga walked into the living room. Her father was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking water from her favorite mug with the little fox on it. He was completely calm, as if nothing had happened. Linda was nowhere to be seen. The front door was slightly ajar. Inga went over and looked out onto the stairwell. At the bottom of the short 3-step staircase leading from the elevator lobby to their apartment, Linda was sitting on the floor. She was clutching her bruised ankle and quietly moaning. Her enormous checkered duffel bags were somehow already standing next to her. Apparently, her father had helped them magically appear outside the door. Inga silently closed the door. She went back into the apartment. Carl came out of the closet with a gym bag in his hand. He didn't look at her. His face was gray, unreadable. He walked silently into the bedroom and started tossing his things from the nightstand into the bag. Phone charger. Watch. Book. He moved like an automaton, obedient, submissive. A broken doll. Inga went into the kitchen and sat down across from her father. He looked at her, and in his eyes was endless fatigue and tenderness. Tomorrow morning I'll call a locksmith. We'll change the lock, he said matter-of-factly, taking another sip of water. At that moment, Carl came out of the bedroom. The bag was zipped up. He walked through the kitchen toward the exit, still not lifting his eyes, not looking at either Inga or her father. He was broken. Completely. At the threshold he hesitated for a second, as if he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He simply left and quietly pulled the door shut behind him. The click of the lock sounded like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Inga stood up and went to the window. Outside, a fine November snowfall was beginning. Snowflakes swirled in the light of the street lamp and settled on the asphalt, covering the tracks. The tracks of her departed husband. The tracks of the taxi he was probably trying to cram his mother and her duffel bags into right now. She watched the snow cover the ground with a white, clean shroud. And suddenly she realized she could breathe. Deeply, fully, drawing icy, clean air into her lungs. For the first time in many weeks. She turned around. Walked into the living room. Went over to the doily lying on the floor. Picked it up with 2 fingers in disgust, like a dead mouse by the tail. Crumpled it into a tight, dirty ball and, without hesitation, threw it into the kitchen trash. Then she went to the box by the door. Carefully lifted it, pressed it to her chest, carried it into the living room, and placed it on the now orphaned dresser. She opened it. Her elephants, her little travelers, lay in a heap. She began taking them out one by one. The elephant from San Francisco with the chipped ear. The ivory-colored elephant from New Orleans. And the smallest one, from Boston. She arranged them on the glossy surface in their familiar, one and only correct order. From largest to smallest. Her army. Her guard. They were home again. The next day felt like waking up after a serious illness. Inga woke to the smell of coffee. Her father was taking charge in the kitchen. He didn't ask any questions. He was simply there. At 10 in the morning, the locksmith arrived, a gloomy, mustached guy, and in 15 minutes he changed the lock on the door. He handed Inga 3 new shiny keys. She took them, and the cold metal in her hand felt good. These were the keys to her fortress, renewed. Now no one would enter without her consent. After her father left, promising to call, Inga was alone in the apartment. The silence was no longer oppressive, it was healing. At first, Inga simply walked from room to room, touching the walls, running her hand over the furniture. She breathed in the air, where ghostly traces of valerian still lingered, and understood that she had to fix this. She started a deep cleaning, a total purge. She gathered everything that reminded her of Linda. A forgotten scarf, a bottle of drops, a pack of cigarettes she found behind the couch. She gathered all of Carl's things he hadn't taken. An old t-shirt, slippers, his toothbrush, a few magazines. She mercilessly dumped all of it into a large trash bag. Then she flung all the windows wide open, creating an icy, cutting draft meant to blow out the last atom of someone else's presence. She washed all the curtains, throws, and couch pillow covers. She mopped the floors, adding a few drops of lavender essential oil, her favorite, to the water. By evening, tired but deeply satisfied, she sat on the couch. The apartment smelled of cleanliness, frost, and lavender. It smelled like home. Closer tonight, her phone vibrated. An unknown number. She didn't answer. A minute later, a message came through. Carl. Inga, Mom badly hurt her leg. She's not well, her blood pressure is high. How could you do this to us? I thought you had a heart. Inga reread the message. Not a word about him. Not a word about her. Only Mom is not well and you. He still didn't understand. Or didn't want to. She put the phone face down on the table and went to make herself some tea. That very one to Hong Pao. She'd bought a new pack on the way home. She poured boiling water into the gaiwan and inhaled the rich, smoky aroma. And at that moment, in that silence, in her clean apartment, she cried for the first time in a long while. These weren't tears of hurt or anger, they were tears of release. She cried over the ruins of her past life, over her naivety, over lost love. She mourned the Inga who had believed in us and our family. And after crying out every last tear, she felt that in place of the ruins there was an empty, clean space. Ready for something new. 2 weeks passed. Carl didn't write or call anymore. Through a mutual acquaintance, Inga learned that he and his mother had rented an apartment somewhere on the outskirts of the city. Linda told everyone that her daughter-in-law had turned out to be a witch, thrown them out onto the street, and taken everything from her son. Some people believed her. Inga didn't care. She changed her phone number. She lived, worked, met with friends, and on weekends went out of town to visit her father. She was settling back into her apartment, her world. She bought new bedding silk, the color of the night sky. She ordered a shelf for the bathroom, the very one she and Carl had once planned to buy. She hung it herself, a little crooked, but with pride. One evening she was sitting in the living room with a book. The apartment was quiet and warm. On the dresser, in the light of the floor lamp, the porcelain sides of her elephants gleamed. The phone lying nearby gave a soft notification sound. A message in the messenger app. From an old contact she'd forgotten to block. From Carl. Inga, I understand everything now. I was wrong. I love you. Give me one more chance. I'll leave my mother. I'll fix everything. I'm begging you. She looked at the message, at the words she had wanted so badly to hear a month ago, words that could have changed everything back then. She looked at them without anger, without joy, without regret. With a light, detached curiosity like an entomologist looking at a butterfly pinned to cardboard. Beautiful, but dead. She set the phone aside. She didn't reply. She stood up, went to the window, and looked out at the night city. Then she came back, picked up a small watering can, and went to water her succulents on the windowsill. A slanted beam of light from the street lamp fell on the small Boston elephant with the chipped tusk standing at the head of the porcelain formation. And for the first time in a very long while, Inga thought he was smiling at her.